She got pregnant by a stranger and then discovered that he was a billionaire hotel magnate. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. Lightning split the New York sky as rain hammered against the windows of the Empire Grand Hotel. Inside, amidst the opulent ballroom's crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed walls, Carter wiped the sweat from her brow. After 8 hours of serving champagne to Manhattan's elite, her feet were screaming in protest. "Last tray, I promise," Lily, her closest friend at the catering company, whispered as she rushed past with an empty platter. The charity gala was winding down, the wealthy guests gradually floating away in their designer gowns and tuxedos, leaving behind half-empty glasses and scattered canapes. Carter glanced at her watch, 11:45 p.m. Her shift had officially ended 15 minutes ago, but in the high-end catering world, you didn't leave until everything was perfect. She'd learned that lesson quickly after moving to New York 6 months ago, armed with nothing but a dream of becoming an interior designer and a determination to make it happen. "Hey!" Lily appeared at her side, already changed out of her server's uniform into a sleek black dress. "A bunch of us are heading to the Velvet Room. Come with us?" Carter hesitated. The Velvet Room was one of those exclusive Manhattan bars she usually avoided. Too expensive, too pretentious. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the lingering energy from the gala, or perhaps the storm raging outside, making the idea of heading straight to her tiny Brooklyn apartment less appealing. "I don't know, Lily. I have that online design course deadline tomorrow." "Girl, you work too hard." Lily linked their arms together. "One drink, that's all I'm asking. Besides, the Velvet Room's interior is gorgeous. Consider it research for your future career." 20 minutes later, Carter found herself stepping into what could only be described as a designer's dream. The bar was a masterpiece of modern luxury. Walls of weathered copper, leather booths in deep burgundy, and strategic lighting that created intimate shadows while highlighting the room's architectural features. Her fingers itched for her sketchbook, wanting to capture every detail. "See, worth it already," Lily grinned, leading them to the bar. "2 Manhattans, please." As the bartender crafted their drinks, Carter's attention drifted to a man sitting alone at the far end of the bar. There was something magnetic about him. Maybe the way he sat with such quiet confidence, or how his expertly tailored suit emphasized his broad shoulders. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting across the crowded space. Time seemed to slow. His eyes were in striking shade of gray, intense and somehow familiar, though she knew they'd never met. She would have remembered those eyes. "Earth to Carter!" Lily's voice broke through her trance. "Your drink's getting warm." Carter forced herself to look away, taking a sip of her cocktail, but she could feel his gaze still on her, making her skin tingle with awareness. "I'm going to say hi to Devon from accounting," Lily announced with a knowing smirk. "Don't have too much fun without me." Before Carter could protest, Lily disappeared into the crowd, leaving her alone at the bar. She took another sip of her drink, trying to focus on the beautiful copper detailing behind the bar instead of the magnetic stranger who was now making his way toward her. "Is this seat taken?" His voice was deep and smooth, with a hint of something she couldn't quite place, authority perhaps, or barely restrained power. Carter turned, finding herself looking up into those remarkable grey eyes. Up close he was even more striking. Strong jawline, dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples, and lips curved in a slight smile that suggested he wasn't used to being denied anything. "It's free," she managed, proud that her voice remained steady. He sat down with fluid grace, signaling the bartender. "Another scotch, neat, and whatever the lady would like." "Oh, I'm fine, thank you," Carter said quickly, gesturing to her still full Manhattan. "I'm Josh," he offered, turning those intense eyes back to her. "Carter," she replied, deliberately using her last name. Something told her this man was dangerous. Not in a physical sense, but in the way he made her pulse race and her usual good judgment flutter away like leaves in the storm still raging outside. "Just Carter?" His smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his left cheek that transformed his face from merely handsome to devastating. "Just Carter," she confirmed, taking another sip of her drink to hide her smile. "And just Josh?" "Just Josh," he agreed, though something flickered in his eyes, amusement perhaps, or secrecy. "I noticed you studying the room when you came in. Are you in the industry?" Carter's eyes lit up. "Not yet, but I'm studying interior design. This place is incredible, the way they've balanced the industrial elements with luxury materials, and that lighting design." She caught herself, feeling her cheeks warm. "Sorry, I tend to get carried away when it comes to design." "Don't apologize," Josh said, leaning slightly closer. "Passion is rare these days. Most people are too afraid to show what really moves them." The way he said it made Carter wonder if he was speaking from experience. There was something almost lonely in his expression, despite his confident demeanor. Outside, thunder crashed, and the lights flickered momentarily. Carter jumped slightly, and Josh's hand instinctively moved to steady her, his fingers warm against her bare arm. The touch sent electricity through her that had nothing to do with the storm. "Tell me more," he said softly, his hand lingering for a moment before withdrawing. "About your designs, your dreams, everything." Maybe it was the Manhattan warming her blood, or the storm making everything feel surreal, or simply those eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed walls. Whatever the reason, Carter found herself talking about moving to New York with nothing but hope and determination, about working 3 jobs to afford her online design courses, about her vision of creating spaces that made people feel both inspired and at home. Josh listened with an intensity that made her feel like every word mattered. He asked thoughtful questions that revealed his own deep knowledge of architecture and design. As the hours slipped away, the rest of the bar seemed to fade into background noise, leaving just the two of them in their own intimate bubble of conversation and growing attraction. It wasn't until Lily appeared, apologetically mentioning the time, that Carter realized it was nearly 3 a.m. The storm had passed, leaving behind a gentle rain that tapped against the windows like nature's own last call. "I should go," Carter said reluctantly, gathering her purse. "Let me call you a car," Josh offered, already reaching for his phone. "Thank you, but I'll share with Lily." Carter stood, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "It was nice meeting you, just Josh." He smiled at the callback to their earlier exchange, but something like regret flickered in his eyes. "The pleasure was mine, just Carter." As she turned to leave, she felt his hand catch hers. "Carter." There was a weight to how he said her name, like he was on the verge of saying something more, but after a moment, he simply squeezed her hand gently and let go. "Take care. Udi." It wasn't until she was in the car, watching the city lights blur past through rain-streaked windows, that Carter realized they hadn't exchanged numbers. The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest. But maybe it was better this way. Their perfect night preserved in memory, untouched by reality's complications. Little did she know, reality was about to become far more complicated than she could have imagined. 3 weeks after that stormy night at the Velvet Room, Carter sat in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, staring at the portfolio spread across her kitchen table. The morning light filtering through her window cast a gentle glow on the carefully curated collection of her design work, sketches, mood boards, and 3D renderings that represented countless sleepless nights and early mornings. Her phone buzzed, another message from Lily. "Found your mystery man yet?" Carter ignored it, just as she'd been trying to ignore the lingering memories of Josh, his grey eyes, the way he'd listened to her dreams as if they were the most fascinating things he'd ever heard. But New York was home to millions. The chances of running into him again were practically non-existent. Besides, she had more pressing concerns. Her hand unconsciously drifted to her stomach as another wave of nausea rolled through her. She'd been fighting it all week, blaming stress, her erratic work schedule, anything but the possibility she'd been avoiding. Her laptop chimed with a new email notification. Carter clicked it open, grateful for the distraction. Internship opportunity. Junior designer position, Blackwood Enterprises Hotel Group. The prestigious name caught her attention immediately. Blackwood Enterprises was legendary in the hospitality industry, known for their innovative designs and unparalleled luxury. An internship there could launch her career. She scanned the requirements, seeking passionate, innovative designers. Minimum 2 years experience or equivalent portfolio work, competitive compensation. Her heart sank at 2 years experience, but something made her keep reading. The position would involve working directly with the hotel group's design team, helping to conceptualize and execute renovations across their property portfolio. The salary listed made her eyes widen. It was more than she made from all 3 of her current jobs combined, with benefits. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Lily burst in without waiting for an answer, carrying a paper bag that smelled suspiciously like the ginger tea Carter had been craving. "You look terrible," Lily announced, setting the bag down. "And you're never sick. Plus, you've been avoiding my calls." "I've been busy," Carter protested weakly, minimizing the internship listing. "And I'm fine, just a stomach bug." Lily's expression softened as she pulled something from her purse. "That's what I thought too once upon a time. Here." Carter stared at the pregnancy test box now sitting on her kitchen table, right next to her carefully arranged portfolio. The sight of it made everything suddenly, terrifyingly real. "I can't be," she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew. The fatigue, the nausea, the way certain smells at the catering kitchen had become unbearable. 10 minutes, Lily said gently. "That's all it takes to know for sure." The next 12 minutes were the longest of Carter's life. She paced her small bathroom while Lily sat on the closed toilet lid, neither of them speaking. When her phone timer chimed, Carter couldn't bring herself to look. "Do you want me to?" Lily offered. Carter shook her head. With trembling fingers, she picked up the test. 2 lines, clear as day. She sank to the bathroom floor, the cool tiles grounding her as her world tilted on its axis. "This wasn't supposed to happen. We were careful." "Nothing's foolproof," Lily said softly, sliding down to sit beside her. Do you want to try to find him?" Carter thought of Josh's intense grey eyes, his perfectly tailored suit, the way he'd moved through the velvet room like he owned it. "He could be anyone, Lily. A tourist, a businessman passing through. I don't even know his last name." "You could go back to the bar, ask around, and say what? Hey, remember that guy from 3 weeks ago?" Carter let out a shaky laugh that was dangerously close to a sob. "No, I can't. I can't build my future on maybes." She pushed herself up from the floor, walking back to her kitchen, where her laptop still displayed the Blackwood Enterprises internship. The words seemed to glow with new significance. Competitive compensation, full benefits, stability. "I need to do this on my own," she said more firmly this time. Her hand moved to her stomach, no longer unconsciously but with purpose. "We need stability, a real future. Not a fairy tale." Lily followed her gaze to the laptop screen. "Blackwood, that's like major leagues, Carter." "I know. Carter straightened her shoulders, determination replacing shock. But look at this portfolio, Lily. Every design, every rendering, they're good, really good. I've been playing it safe, taking catering jobs and dreaming small because I was afraid of rejection. But I can't afford to be afraid anymore. She clicked the Apply Now button before she could second-guess herself. It's not just about me now. As she began filling out the application, a strange calm settled over her. The timing wasn't perfect. Nothing about this situation was perfect. But maybe that was okay. Her whole life, she'd waited for the perfect moment. Perfect grades, perfect portfolio, perfect timing to start her real career. Now, staring at the positive pregnancy test still clutched in her left hand while her right typed her contact information, she realized something. Perfect. Moments didn't exist. You had to create your own opportunities, your own destiny. Whatever happens, Lily said, squeezing her shoulder, you're not alone in this. Carter nodded, fighting back tears as she attached her portfolio to the application. As she clicked Submit, her nausea finally subsided, replaced by a fierce determination. She had exactly 8 months to transform her life before her baby arrived. The universe had thrown her a curveball, but Carter had always been good at adapting plans. She would build a future for herself and her child, one careful step at a time, starting with this application. What she didn't know, as she hit that submit button, was that she'd just set in motion a chain of events that would bring her face to face with Josh again, in the last way she could have ever expected. Sarah Carter smoothed her navy blazer. For the 100th time, as she gazed up at the gleaming facade of Blackwood Tower, 60 stories of steel and glass stretched toward the Manhattan sky, its windows reflecting the morning sunlight like 1,000 mirrors. Her interview was scheduled for 9 a.m., but she'd arrived 45 minutes early, needing time to calm her racing heart. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, patting her still flat stomach through the carefully chosen outfit that revealed no hint of her condition. At 8 weeks pregnant, she'd managed to keep the morning sickness at bay with a combination of ginger tea and sheer determination. The lobby was a testament to everything she aspired to create as a designer: soaring ceilings with sculptural light fixtures that cast intricate shadows, walls of book-matched marble in warm honey tones, and seating areas that somehow managed to feel intimate despite the grand scale of the space. "Miss Carter," the receptionist's voice pulled her from her design analysis. "They're ready for you on the 58th floor." The elevator ride gave Sarah time to review her mental notes. She'd spent the past week researching everything she could find about Blackwood Enterprises' design philosophy. Their hotels were known for seamlessly blending luxury with local culture, creating spaces that felt both opulent and authentically rooted in their locations. When the elevator doors opened, she found herself in another masterpiece of interior design. A young woman with a tablet greeted her. "Miss Carter, I'm Amanda, Mr. Blackwood's assistant. Please follow me." Sarah's footsteps sank into plush carpeting as they walked down a corridor lined with framed photographs. Blackwood properties around the world, she realized. Each one was a perfect composition of architecture and atmosphere. "The design team is very impressed with your portfolio," Amanda commented as they walked. "Especially the conceptual work you did for small-space urban hotels. Very innovative." Sarah's confidence lifted slightly. She'd poured her heart into those designs, imagining ways to bring luxury to compact city spaces without sacrificing comfort or style. Amanda stopped at a set of double doors. "Ready?" Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She could do this. She had to do this. The conference room beyond the doors was flooded with natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of Central Park. 3 people sat at the long table. 2 women she didn't. recognize, and a man whose back was to the door as he studied something on his laptop. "Miss Sarah Carter," Amanda announced. The man turned around and Sarah's world stopped spinning. Grey eyes, that familiar intense gaze, the slight smile with the dimple in his left cheek. Josh. Except it wasn't just Josh anymore. This was Joshua Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, the man whose name was on the building itself. She saw the exact moment recognition hit him. His eyes widened fractionally, that composed smile faltering for just a split second before his professional mask slipped back into place. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly, standing. "Welcome to Blackwood Enterprises. I'm Joshua Blackwood, and these are our lead designers, Regina Walsh and Patricia Chen." Sarah forced herself to breathe, to smile, to shake hands with everyone as if her entire universe hadn't just shifted sideways. Her palm tingled where it had briefly met Josh's. "No, Mr. Blackwood's," in a handshake that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. "Please, sit." Regina gestured to the chair directly across from Josh. Sarah sank into it, grateful for the solid surface beneath her, as memories from that night at the Velvet Room crashed over her. His hand on her arm during the thunderstorm, the way he'd listened to her dreams, the intensity in his eyes when... "Your portfolio shows remarkable promise," Patricia was saying. Sarah dragged her focus back to the present. "Particularly, your understanding of how to create intimate spaces within larger environments. Talk us through your design philosophy." Sarah opened her mouth, praying her voice would remain steady. As she began to speak about her belief in the power of thoughtful design to transform experiences, she felt Josh's gaze on her like a physical weight. She didn't dare look directly at him, instead addressing her responses to Regina and Patricia. "And what drew you to Blackwood Enterprises specifically?" Josh's deep voice cut through her careful composure. Now she had to look at him. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment she was back in that bar, feeling that same magnetic pull. But now everything was different. Now she carried a secret that changed everything. "Your commitment to authentic luxury," she answered, fighting to keep her voice professional. "Every Blackwood property tells a story, creates an experience that goes beyond simple opulence. I want to be part of creating those stories." Was it her imagination, or did something flicker in his eyes at the word stories? The rest of the interview passed in a blur of technical questions and design discussions. Sarah answered on autopilot, her mind spinning with implications. Of all the hotels in New York, of all the companies she could have applied to. "Thank you, Miss Carter," Regina finally said. "We'll be in touch very soon." Sarah stood on shaky legs, gathering her portfolio. As she turned to leave, Josh's voice stopped her. "Miss Carter?" And there was a carefully controlled note in his voice that hadn't been there that night at the bar. "A moment, please. I have a few additional questions about your experience with hotel renovations." Regina and Patricia filed out, leaving Sarah alone with the father of her unborn child, a man who had no idea he was about to become a father, a man who wasn't just the stranger from the bar anymore, but one of the most powerful people in the hospitality industry. The door clicked shut behind the others. In the sudden silence, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, too fast and too loud. "Carter," Josh said softly, using just her surname like he had that night. "I think we need to talk." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her stomach before she caught herself. "Mr. Blackwood, Josh," he corrected, taking a step toward her. "At least, I was Josh that night." The morning sun streaming through the windows caught the silver in his hair, reminding her of how it had looked in the intimate lighting of the Velvet Room. But here, in his domain, surrounded by the empire he'd built, he was a different man entirely. "I didn't know," she managed to say. "When I applied, I had no idea." That the guy from the bar owned the bar. A ghost of that familiar smile touched his lips, and the hotel, and this building. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. If you'd prefer to take me out of consideration for the position, I completely understand. Take you out of consideration. Josh's eyebrows rose. Your portfolio is exceptional, Sarah. That hasn't changed because of our previous meeting. Our previous meeting. Such a sterile way to describe a night that had changed her life in ways he couldn't imagine. Thank you, she said carefully, clutching her portfolio like a shield. Is there anything else, Mr. Blackwood? She saw him flinch slightly at the formal address. Have dinner with me, he said abruptly. Tonight we should discuss everything. Sarah's heart lurched. I don't think that would be appropriate given the circumstances. The circumstances of me potentially being your boss, or the circumstances of what happened that night. Both, she wanted to say. Neither. Everything's different now. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. Thank you for the interview, Mr. Blackwood. I look forward to hearing the team's decision. She turned and walked out before he could respond, before she could break down, before the weight of all her secrets could crush her. It wasn't until she was in the elevator, watching the numbers tick down, that she finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hand pressed against her stomach, feeling the tiny life growing there. A life created on a night when Josh was just Josh, and she was just Carter, and the future seemed full of beautiful possibilities rather than complicated truths. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and Sarah stepped out into a world that had irrevocably changed. She had wanted stability, a future for her child. Instead, she'd walked straight into a situation more complex than anything she could have imagined. And somewhere high above her, in his tower of steel and glass, Josh Blackwood was undoubtedly thinking of the woman who'd walked away from him twice now. First on a stormy night in his bar, and now in the cold light of morning in his empire of luxury hotels. The offer letter arrived the next morning. Sarah stared at her laptop screen, reading the email for the third time. The position was hers, pending background check and drug screening, with a start date just 2 weeks away. Her salary would be even higher than the range advertised, and the benefits package was comprehensive, including full medical coverage from day one. They hired you, Lily's voice crackled through her phone speaker. After that whole scene with him? Apparently. Sarah sank onto her couch, one hand absently rubbing her stomach, a habit she'd developed since learning about the pregnancy. Regina, the lead designer, called personally to tell me the team was unanimous in their decision. The team meaning him. The team meaning the design department, Sarah corrected, though uncertainty gnawed at her. Had Josh influenced the decision, and if he had, was it because of her talent or their history? Are you going to take it? Sarah looked around her small apartment, at the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter, at the design books she'd been slowly collecting from second-hand stores. I have to. This baby deserves better than what I can give them on a waitress's salary. And the fact that the baby's father is your new boss. Sarah closed her eyes. He's not my boss. Regina is. I'll be working with the design team, not directly. With him. Even as she said it, she knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing about this situation was simple. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, scrutinizing her reflection. At 10 weeks pregnant, her body hadn't changed much, but she felt different, more vulnerable, more determined. She'd chosen a loose-fitting silk blouse and tailored black pants, professional attire that revealed nothing of her condition. The morning passed in a blur of paperwork, security badges, and IT setups. Regina introduced her to the design team, a creative, energetic group that immediately made her feel welcome. By lunch, Sarah had her own desk, complete with dual monitors, and the latest design software, We're starting you on the Chicago property renovation, Regina explained, spreading blueprints across the conference room table. The hotel needs a complete overhaul, but we want to preserve its historic character while bringing in modern luxury elements. Sarah leaned forward, already seeing possibilities in the grand old building's bones. This was what she'd dreamed. Of real design work, challenging projects, a chance to prove herself. The executive team has final approval, of course, Regina continued. Mr. Blackwood is particularly invested in this property. He'll want regular updates on our progress. Sarah's pencil paused over her sketchpad. Of course he would. The afternoon stretched on, filled with research and preliminary sketches. Sarah lost herself in the work, almost forgetting about her complicated situation, until a familiar voice made her heart stop. "How's the new designer settling in?" Josh stood in the doorway of the design department, his presence immediately commanding. Attention. Every head turned toward him, but his eyes found Sarah's instantly. "Wonderfully," Regina replied. "She's already got some fascinating ideas for the Chicago project." "Show me." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her sketches. She could do this. Professional, distant, focus on the work. She walked him through her initial concepts, explaining how she wanted to honor the building's Art Deco heritage while incorporating modern elements. Her voice grew stronger as she talked. About design, her passion for the work overshadowing her personal turmoil. Josh asked intelligent questions, challenged some of her choices, praised others. If anyone noticed the underlying tension between them, they didn't show it. "Good work," he said finally. "I look forward to seeing these ideas developed further." His eyes lingered on her face for a moment too long before he turned to leave. Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She could feel Regina watching her curiously, but refused to meet her gaze. The rest of the day passed without incident, but as Sarah packed up her things to leave, Amanda appeared at her desk. "Mr. Blackwood would like to see you in his office." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Now?" Amanda nodded. "He said it won't take long." The elevator ride to the executive floor felt endless. Sarah used the time to steel herself, to remember why she was here. For her baby, for their future. She could handle whatever Josh had to say. His office was exactly what she would have expected. Corner views of Manhattan, modern furniture in rich leather and dark wood, abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Josh stood at the window, his back to the door, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "Close the door, please." Sarah did, then stood her ground near the entrance. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Blackwood." He turned, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Gone was the polished CEO. This was Josh from the bar, intense and unguarded. "Drop the Mr. Blackwood," he said quietly. "Not here, not when it's just us." "There shouldn't be a just us," Sarah replied, proud of how steady her voice remained. "I'm here to work, to design. That's all." "Is it?" He set his glass down and took a step toward her. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about that night, about you." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. It was one night, a beautiful night, but what? Another step closer. "Tell me you haven't thought about it, about us." "There is no us," Sarah said firmly, even as her body hummed with awareness of his proximity. "There can't be. You're my boss's boss's boss, and I'm just starting my career." "You're not just anything, Sarah." The way he said her name made her shiver. "You're talented, passionate, beautiful." "Stop." She held up a hand. "Please. I need this job, Josh. I need to prove myself on my own merits. Whatever happened between us, it has to stay in the past." Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, frustration. "And if I don't want it to?" Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her stomach before she caught herself. But Josh's sharp eyes caught the movement, his brow furrowing slightly. "Sarah," "I should go," she said quickly. "Thank you for the opportunity to work here. I won't let the team down." She turned and fled before he could say more, before she could break down and tell him everything. In the elevator, she pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall, fighting back tears. One day down. How many more could she keep this secret? How long before Josh figured it out? And what would happen when he did? In his office, Josh stared. At the closed door, his drink forgotten. Something was different about Sarah, something beyond her obvious discomfort with their situation. He'd seen the way she'd touched her stomach, the flash of fear in her eyes when he'd noticed. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then made a call. "Amanda, get me everything you can find on Sarah Carter, and I mean everything." Josh Blackwood stared at the manila folder on his desk, his jaw tightening as he read through its contents for the third time. The private investigator had been thorough, perhaps too thorough. Every detail of Sarah Carter's life lay before him. Her childhood in a small Ohio town, her scholarship to design school, her string of service industry jobs since moving to New York, and her recent medical records. He pushed back from his desk, running a hand through his hair as he gazed out at the Manhattan skyline. The sun was setting, painting the city in shades of gold and purple. In buildings below, lights were winking on as other executives ended their work days. But Josh couldn't leave, not until he processed what he'd learned. Sarah was pregnant, approximately 11 weeks, according to her latest doctor's visit. The timing aligned perfectly with their night together. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Richard Blackwood, Josh's father and chairman of the board, strode into the office with the confidence of a man who'd spent decades commanding rooms. At 70, he remained an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "You're still here," Richard observed, helping himself to the whiskey decanter. "Something about the Chicago property?" Josh closed the folder quickly, "just reviewing some personnel files." "Ah, yes, the new designer." Richard's tone was carefully neutral. "Regina speaks highly of her work. Though I must admit, I'm curious about why you pushed so hard for her hiring." "Her portfolio, please." Richard cut him off with a wave. "I've known you since before you could walk, Joshua. There's something more going on here." Josh met his father's steely gaze. "It's complicated." "It usually is when a woman's involved." Richard sipped his whiskey. "What's her angle?" "Not everyone has an angle, Dad. In our world, they always do." Richard set his glass down with a decisive click. "Remember Alexandra, the merger she was really after? Or Christina, who sold those lovely stories to the tabloids?" Josh's jaw clenched. "Sarah's different." "Sarah?" Richard's eyebrows rose at the familiar use of her name. "Well, that explains the investigation file you just tried to hide." He sighed heavily. "Whatever this is, handle it, quietly. We don't need another scandal, not with the Chicago project at such a crucial stage." After his father left, Josh reopened the folder, this time focusing on Sarah's most recent activities. No prenatal vitamins, purchased on her credit card. No baby items. Just regular doctor's visits paid in cash, and a growing balance in a newly opened savings account. She was keeping the pregnancy secret. But why? 3 floors below, Sarah bent over her desk, fighting. Another wave of nausea as she reviewed material samples for the Chicago project. At 11 weeks, her morning sickness had evolved into all-day sickness, making every workday a challenge in endurance. "These just came from the mill," Regina said, dropping a stack of fabric swatches on Sarah's desk. "The custom colorway you suggested for the suites. What do you think?" Sarah forced herself to focus on the luxurious textiles, ignoring her churning stomach. "The depth of the blue is perfect, but can we see it in a higher thread count? For the durability standards?" Her voice trailed off as a familiar scent wafted through the office. Someone's lunch, heavy with garlic and spices. Sarah's face went pale. "Sarah, are you all right?" "Excuse me," she managed, before hurrying to the bathroom. When she emerged several minutes later, splashing cold water on her face hadn't completely erased the signs of her illness. She looked up to find Olivia Hastings watching her in the mirror, the elegantly polished head of PR, who, according to office gossip, had been trying to catch Josh's attention for months. "Rough morning?" Olivia's tone was sympathetic, but her eyes were sharp with interest. "Something I ate didn't agree with me," Sarah replied, trying to sound casual. Olivia reapplied her lipstick with practiced precision. "You know, I had the most interesting conversation with Josh, sorry, Mr. Blackwood, about you the other day. He seems quite invested in your success here." Sarah's heart skipped. "The whole executive team is invested in the Chicago project." "Of course." Olivia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Though I have to wonder why he specifically requested you for the team. Your experience is limited, after all." Before Sarah could respond, the bathroom door opened and Regina entered. "Sarah, there you are. Mr. Blackwood wants to review your latest concepts for the Chicago suites. Are you up for a presentation?" No, Sarah thought. She wasn't up for anything that involved being in a closed room with Josh right now, but she nodded. "Just give me 5 minutes to gather my materials." Back at her desk, Sarah collected her sketches and samples with trembling hands. She could feel Olivia's speculative gaze from across the office, could sense the questions building among her co-workers about Josh's particular interest in her work. The elevator ride to Josh's floor felt like ascending to her own execution. When she entered his office, she found not only Josh, but also his father, Richard Blackwood himself, waiting to review her work. "Miss Carter," Richard's handshake was firm, assessing, "I've heard promising things about your vision for the Chicago property." Sarah launched into her presentation, focusing on the technical aspects of her designs rather than the way Josh's eyes followed her every movement. She was halfway through explaining her concept for the presidential suite when the nausea hit again, harder this time. The custom wall covering would feature... She swayed slightly, her vision blurring at the edges. "Sarah?" Josh's voice seemed to come from very far away. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Josh lunging forward to catch her as she fell. She awoke on the leather sofa in Josh's office, his jacket draped over her like a blanket. A concerned-looking Amanda hovered nearby with a glass of water, while Josh paced by the windows, running his hands through his hair in a gesture she was beginning to recognize as agitation. "The doctor's on his way up," Amanda said softly. "No," Sarah sat up too quickly, making her head spin. "No doctor, I'm fine. I just haven't eaten much today." "Sarah," Josh's voice was quiet but firm. He dismissed Amanda with a nod, then turned to face her. "When were you going to tell me?" Her heart stopped. "Tell you what?" "About the baby." His eyes met hers, filled with a storm of emotions. "Our baby." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Sarah clutched his jacket closer, suddenly cold despite the warm afternoon sun streaming through the windows. "How did you... Does it matter?" He moved closer, kneeling beside the sofa. "What matters is that you're carrying my child, and you weren't going to tell me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't want you to think I was trying to trap you, or that I took this job to... To what? To give our child a father? A future?" His voice was gentle now, his hand covering hers. "Sarah, look at me." She did, finding not the anger she'd feared, but something softer, more complex. "We need to talk," he said. "Really talk. No more secrets, no more running away." Before she could respond, his office door opened. Richard Blackwood stood in the doorway, taking in the scene before him. His son kneeling beside a crying Sarah, their hands clasped, Josh's jacket wrapped around her shoulders. "Well," Richard said coldly, "I believe I'm beginning to understand the situation." "Everyone out," Richard Blackwood commanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a steel blade. "Except you two." Amanda quickly gathered her things and slipped past him, closing the door with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Sarah struggled to sit up straighter on the leather sofa, still wrapped in Josh's jacket, while Josh rose to his full height, squaring his shoulders as he faced his father. "Before you say anything," Josh began, "I think I can piece this together myself." Richard's cold gaze swept over Sarah, lingering on her still flat stomach. "How far along?" Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. 11 weeks. Convenient. Not timing. Richard's lip curled slightly, right before landing a position at one of the most prestigious firms in the industry. "Dad, I'm not finished." Richard held up a hand, silencing his son. "Do you have any idea what this could do to our reputation, to the Chicago deal? We're in delicate negotiations with heritage preservation groups, and now this scandal." "There is no scandal." Josh's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Sarah is a talented designer who earned her position here, and the child she's carrying is my responsibility." "Your responsibility?" Richard barked out a laugh. "Oh, I'm well aware of that. The question is, what does she want in exchange for?" Handling this quietly, Sarah stood up so quickly that Josh's jacket fell to the floor. "I don't want anything from you, either of you." Her voice shook but grew stronger with each word. "I took this job because I earned it. I kept my pregnancy private because it's my business. And I didn't tell Josh because I wanted to prove I could make it on my own." Noble sentiments, Richard's tone suggested he believed otherwise. "But surely you understand your position here is now untenable." "The hell it is," Josh stepped between them. "Sarah stays. End of discussion." "And what message does that send?" Richard countered. "That sleeping with the CEO is a fast track to success? That we reward personal indiscretions with professional advancement?" "The message it sends," Josh's voice dropped dangerously, "is that Blackwood Enterprises values talent and judges people on their merits. Sarah's designs for Chicago are exactly what we need. The board agrees. Or did you forget that you yourself praised her concept last week?" A tense silence followed. Sarah could almost see the calculations running behind Richard's eyes as he reassessed the situation. "Very well," he said finally. "Miss Carter stays, for now. But this situation needs to be managed properly." He turned to Sarah. "I'll have legal draw up an agreement. Generous compensation, full medical coverage, discretion assured." "No." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "I beg your pardon. I said no." She met Richard's startled gaze. "I won't sign anything. I won't take hush money. I'm here to work, to design, to build my career. My child, our child, is not a situation to be managed. You can't possibly be that naive." "Enough!" Josh's command cracked like a whip. "Sarah's right. This isn't a corporate takeover or a PR crisis. This is my child, my family." The word family seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. He stared at his son for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Your mother," he said finally, his voice softer, "would have loved a grandchild." The sudden mention of Josh's deceased mother changed the atmosphere in the room. Sarah saw Josh's shoulders tense, saw pain flash across his face before he masked it. "She would have welcomed Sarah," Josh said quietly, "without questioning her motives or trying to buy her silence." Richard flinched. For the first time, his perfectly composed facade cracked, revealing something almost like regret. "Perhaps," he conceded. Then, to Sarah's surprise, he turned to her. My wife, Josh's mother, believed in judging people by their actions, not their circumstances. I haven't always honored that belief as I should have. Dad, Josh started, but Richard held up a hand. Let me finish. Miss Carter, Sarah, you're right. Your work speaks for itself. And if my son, he paused, choosing his words carefully, if Josh sees in you what Elizabeth might have seen, then perhaps I owe you the courtesy of withholding judgment. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes but blinked them back. Damn pregnancy hormones. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Don't thank me yet. He straightened his tie, his businessman's mask sliding back into place. The press will still need to be managed. Olivia Hastings has already started asking questions, and the board will need to be informed of the personal connection between you and Josh to avoid any appearance of impropriety. I'll handle it, Josh said firmly. We'll handle it, Sarah corrected. Both men turned to look at her. Together, as equals. That's the only way this works. A ghost of a smile touched Richard's lips. She reminds me of your mother, he said to Josh. Then, to Sarah, Elizabeth would have liked that spirit. Don't lose it. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. I expect both of you in my office tomorrow morning to discuss this properly. And Sarah, do try not to faint during any more presentations. It makes the investors nervous. After he left, Sarah sank back onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. Josh sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not quite touching. I'm sorry, they both said simultaneously, then laughed, breaking some of the tension. You first, Josh offered. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the baby. Sarah turned to face him. I was scared, not of you exactly, but of this, all of this. Your world is so different from mine. And I'm sorry I had you investigated. He held up a hand when she started to protest. I knew something was wrong. I could see you struggling, but you wouldn't talk to me. It was wrong, but I was worried. What happens now? Josh reached for her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Now we do what you said. We handle this together. But, Sarah, yes, I need you to know something. He turned to face her fully, his grey eyes intense. This isn't just about the baby. What I feel for you, it started that night at the bar, before I knew who you were, before any of this. When you walked into that interview and I saw you again, it felt like a fate, Sarah finished softly. Yes. He smiled, that familiar dimple appearing. Terrifying, isn't it? Sarah laughed, but it caught in her throat as Josh's free hand came up to cup her cheek. Josh, I'm not proposing, not yet. His thumb brushed her lower lip. We have a lot to figure out first, but I want you to know that whatever happens with the company, with my father, with anything, you and this baby are my priority now. Sarah leaned into his touch, letting herself believe just for a moment that everything might work out. But as Josh's lips met hers in a gentle kiss, she couldn't quite silence the voice in her head that whispered, when things seem too good to be true, they usually are. She didn't know it then, but that voice would prove prophetic sooner than she could have imagined. The gossip spread through Blackwood Tower like wildfire. It started with whispers in the break room. How Sarah Carter always seemed to have direct access to the CEO's office. How Josh Blackwood had been spotted leaving her design presentations with a particular smile. How their eyes met across conference room tables with an electricity that couldn't be hidden. By the end of the week, everyone had a theory, but no one had the full story. Not yet. Sarah felt the stares as she walked through the office, heard the conversations that stopped when she entered a room. She kept her head high, focusing on her work, trying to ignore the way her morning sickness had evolved into a constant, gnawing awareness of her changing body. "These are incredible," Regina said, spreading Sarah's latest Chicago suite designs across the conference room table. "The way you've integrated the building's Art Deco elements with modern luxury. It's exactly what we needed." Sarah allowed herself a small smile of pride. The project had become her refuge, the one place where her talent, not her personal life, was the focus of attention. "When can we present to the preservation board?" she asked, adjusting a fabric swatch. "Next week." Regina hesitated. "Though there's been some discussion about whether you should be the one to present." Sarah's head snapped up. "What? Why?" "Given the current situation." Regina chose her words carefully. "Some board members feel it might be better to have someone else take the lead, to avoid any appearance of favoritism." Sarah finished flatly. "Politics," Regina corrected. "This project is crucial for the company. We can't afford any distractions." Before Sarah could respond, a knock at the conference room door made them both turn. Josh stood there looking impossibly handsome in a charcoal suit that matched his eyes. "Ladies," he nodded to them both. "Sarah, do you have a moment?" Regina gathered her papers quickly. "We'll continue this discussion later." As she left, Sarah noticed how she carefully closed the door behind her. More fuel for the gossip fire. "You look tired," Josh said softly, moving closer. "Thanks," Sarah replied dryly. "Just what every woman wants to hear." "I mean—" He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration. "I'm worried about you. About both of you." His eyes dropped to her stomach, still flat beneath her loose blouse, but now carrying their secret like a beacon to those who knew to look. "We're fine." Sarah straightened the fabric swatches, needing something to do with her hands. "But apparently, I'm being taken off the preservation board presentation." "What?" Josh's brow furrowed. "Who said that?" "Does it matter? They're right. I'm a liability now. The pregnant designer sleeping with the CEO, it's like something out of a bad romance novel." "Hey!" Josh caught her hands, stilling their nervous movement. "You are not a liability. You are the most talented designer on this project, and you earned your place here. Anyone who suggests otherwise can deal with me." "That's exactly the a problem," Sarah pulled away. "I don't want to succeed because you're defending me. I want to succeed on my own merits. And then succeed on your own merits. Give the presentation. Show them why you're the best person for this job." "And what about the rumors, the whispers, the way everyone looks at me?" Josh was quiet for a moment. "I could make an announcement. Official statement about our relationship, the baby. Get ahead of the gossip." "No." Sarah's response was immediate. "I'm not ready for that, not yet." "Sarah, please, Josh, just give me time." He looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded. Instead, "All right, but promise me something." What?" "Let me take you to dinner tonight, a real date. No hiding, no pretending we're just boss and employee, just us." Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips despite her concerns. "What happened to giving me time?" "Time doesn't mean we can't be together." He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I want to do this right, Sarah, all of it." The tenderness in his voice made her throat tight. "Okay," she whispered. "Dinner." His smile, that devastating smile with the dimple she loved, was worth all the gossip in the world. But their moment was interrupted by a sharp knock. Amanda stood in the doorway, her usually composed face tight with concern. "Mr. Blackwood, there's someone here to see you. She says she's pregnant with your baby." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stepped back from Josh, watching as all color drained from his face. "What?" His voice was barely audible. "Olivia Hastings," Amanda clarified. "She's in your father's office now, with her lawyer." Sarah felt the room spin slightly. "Olivia?" Josh reached for her. "Sarah, wait!" But she was already moving, pushing past Amanda, needing to get away. Her heart pounded in her ears as she rushed toward the elevator, ignoring Josh calling her name. The doors were closing when a hand caught them. Richard Blackwood stepped in, his face unreadable as always. "Miss Carter," he pressed the lobby button. "I assume you've heard." Sarah stared straight ahead, fighting back tears. "Is it true?" "That's what we're about to find out." He was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, I don't believe it is. Olivia Hastings has been trying to get her hooks into this company for years." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Richard said as the elevator reached the lobby, "contrary to what you might think of me, I want my son to be happy, and I've never seen him as happy as he's been this past week." He held the door open. "The question is, are you going to let Olivia Hastings destroy that happiness without a fight?" Sarah stepped out of the elevator, her mind racing. Behind her, Richard's voice carried one last message. "Sometimes, Miss Carter, the best defense is a good offense. Think about that." As the elevator doors closed, Sarah stood in the bustling lobby, one hand pressed to her stomach where their baby grew. Richard was right. She'd been trying so hard to stay professional, to keep their relationship private, to prove herself independently. But maybe it was time to fight back. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Lily, remember how you said I should stop hiding and take control of my own story? I think I'm ready to do that, but I'm going to need your help." Upstairs in Richard's office, Olivia Hastings was about to learn that she wasn't the only one who knew how to play power games in the world of Manhattan's elite. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Lily asked, adjusting Sarah's hair one last time. They stood in the powder room of Le Bernardin, one of New York's most prestigious restaurants, where the city's elite came not just to dine, but to be seen. Sarah smoothed her midnight blue dress, carefully chosen to both flatter her figure and conceal her small but growing baby bump. At 13 weeks, she was finally starting to feel like herself again, the morning sickness fading into memory. "No," she admitted, touching the delicate silver locket at her throat, a gift from Josh, containing the sonogram picture from their first doctor's appointment together. "But I'm tired of hiding." The past 2 weeks since Olivia's bombshell had been a whirlwind of lawyers, meetings, and revelations. Olivia's claim had crumbled quickly under scrutiny. She couldn't provide dates, details, or any evidence of a relationship with Josh, but the damage to Sarah's peace of mind had been done. "Table for 2, under Blackwood," she told the maitre, ignoring the whispers her announcement generated among the waiting diners. Tonight was about making a statement. Josh was already there, standing as she approached. His eyes lit up at the sight of her, that special smile she'd come to think of as hers alone spreading across his face. "You look beautiful," he murmured, kissing her cheek in full view of the restaurant's wealthy patrons. As he held her chair, she caught sight of several people quickly looking away, phones already in hand. "Let them look," Josh said softly, reading her mind as he took his seat. "I'm done hiding how I feel about you." Sarah reached across the table, taking his hand. "So am I." They ordered, making small talk about the Chicago project. Now back under Sarah's lead after she'd stood her ground with the board. But they both knew tonight wasn't really about dinner. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Josh asked as their entrees arrived. Sarah took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." Tomorrow would be her first official public appearance as Josh's partner, a charity gala at the Empire Grand, the very hotel where she'd once worked as a waitress. The irony wasn't lost on her. "We don't have to do this," Josh offered. "We could wait." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. Olivia might have been lying about her pregnancy, but she was right about one thing. Perception matters in your world. If I'm going to be part of your life, part of our child's life, I need to stop hiding in the shadows. And Josh squeezed her hand. Our world, he corrected, and you're already part of it. More than you know. A commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Olivia Hastings stood in the doorway, her face flushing as she recognized them. Right on time, Sarah murmured. Josh's eyebrows rose. You knew she'd be here. Lily might have mentioned that she always has a standing Friday reservation. Sarah smiled innocently, just like she might have mentioned to several fashion bloggers that there could be some interesting photo opportunities at Le Bernardin tonight. Understanding dawned on Josh's face. You planned this. I learned from the best. Sarah's smile turned slightly wicked. Your father did say something about a good offense. As if on cue, camera flashes began popping from discreet corners of the restaurant. Sarah turned to Josh, making sure her profile was perfectly positioned for the photographers. Kiss me, she whispered. His eyes darkened. Here? Trust me. Josh leaned across the table, one hand coming up to cup her cheek, as his lips met hers in a kiss that was both tender and claiming. Sarah heard the clicks of camera phones intensify, knew that by morning their relationship would be all over social media. But she also knew something else would be captured in those photos, the way her hand instinctively cradled her stomach, the loving glance Josh gave her as they parted, the unmistakable glow of a woman in love and expecting. Their story told their way. When they finally looked up, Olivia was gone. Remind me never to underestimate you, Josh said, a note of admiration in his voice. Your father did warn you that I remind him of your mother. Josh's expression softened at the mention of Elizabeth. He did, and he was right. She would have loved this, loved you. Tell me about her, Sarah asked softly. As their dessert arrived, Josh shared stories of his mother, her kindness, her strength, her ability to navigate the complex world of Manhattan's elite without losing her authenticity. Sarah listened, understanding more with each story about why Richard had finally accepted her, why Josh was the man he was. She believed in grand gestures, Josh finished, just as their coffee arrived. Speaking of which, he reached into his jacket pocket, producing a small blue box that made Sarah's heart stop. Josh, it's not what you think, he said quickly, though his eyes twinkled. Well, not exactly. He opened the box to reveal a key. Move in with me, he said simply, not because of the baby or the press or anything else. Move in with me because I love waking up to your sleepy smile, because I love watching you sketch designs on napkins at breakfast, because I love you, Sarah Carter, and I want to build a life with you. Sarah felt tears threatening. Damn hormones. But managed to keep her voice steady. Your father helped me pick out the perfect apartment for us. Josh's smile widened at her surprise. Turns out he's quite invested in his grandchild having a proper nursery with the best views of Central Park. You already bought an apartment? I believe in grand gestures too. He reached for her hand. What do you say? Sarah looked at the key gleaming in its velvet box, at the man she loved watching her with hopeful eyes, at the future suddenly spreading out before her like a road paved with possibilities. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. As Josh slipped the key into her hand, neither of them noticed the dark-suited man watching from the bar, speaking quietly into his phone. Neither of them could have known that their moment of triumph was about to be shattered by a ghost from Josh's past, one that even Richard Blackwood's influence couldn't protect them from. But for now, in the warm glow of Le Bernardin, surrounded by the flashbulbs of society photographers and the approving murmurs of Manhattan's elite, Sarah and Josh were simply two people in love, planning their future. Sometimes Sarah would later reflect, happiness is sweetest right before the storm. The morning headlines hit like a tidal wave. Blackwood heir's secret past revealed. Former fiancé speaks out. Scandal at Blackwood Enterprises. The woman Josh left at the altar. Rebecca Winters tells all. He's done this before. Sarah stared at the newspapers spread across their new kitchen island, each one featuring variations of the same story. Beside them lay printed screenshots of social media posts, all telling the same tale. 5 years ago, Josh Blackwood had been engaged to Rebecca Winters, daughter of hotel magnate James Winters, until he'd left her days before their wedding, allegedly after discovering she was pregnant. It's not true. Josh's voice was raw as he paced their half-furnished living room. Moving boxes still lined the walls they'd barely finished unpacking after their celebrated move-in last week. None of it is true. Then tell me what is true, Sarah said quietly. She needed to hear it from him, needed to understand why Rebecca's story felt so terrifyingly familiar. Josh stopped pacing, running both hands through his already disheveled hair. He'd been up all night with his PR team and lawyers, trying to contain the explosion. Rebecca and I were engaged, he began, finally dropping onto the sofa. It was more of a business arrangement than a romance. Our fathers wanted to merge the hotel chains. But a month before the wedding, I discovered she'd been funneling company information to her father, helping him secretly buy up properties we were targeting. And the pregnancy? A lie. His eyes met hers, pleading for understanding. She claimed it after I called off the engagement, tried to use it to force me to go through with the wedding. But there was never a baby, Sarah. She admitted it eventually when the tests proved it. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her own stomach, now showing a definite curve at 15 weeks. Why is she coming forward now? The Chicago property. Josh's jaw tightened. The one you're designing. It used to belong to Winters Hotels. James Winters has been trying to buy it back for years, but we've blocked every attempt. Now that the renovation is moving forward, they're trying to stop it, Sarah finished, by discrediting you and me. As if on cue, her phone buzzed, with a message from Regina. Emergency board meeting at 10. Your presence is requested. Josh saw the message over her shoulder and stood. I'll handle the board. You don't need to be there for this. Yes, I do. Sarah straightened her shoulders. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about our child, our future. I won't hide from Rebecca Winters or anyone else. A ghost of a smile touched Josh's lips. When did you get so fierce? Around the time I fell in love with a complicated billionaire. She touched the locket at her throat, their baby's first picture still safely inside. Now help me pick an outfit that says confident professional rather than pregnant homewrecker. An hour later, Sarah walked into the Blackwood Enterprises boardroom beside Josh, wearing a beautifully tailored maternity suit in deep burgundy. She'd chosen the color carefully, powerful without being aggressive, confident without being showy. The board members were already assembled, their faces grave. Richard sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as always. But Sarah noticed how his eyes softened slightly when they landed on her. His tacit support meant more than she'd expected. Before we begin, Josh addressed the room, his hand resting on the back of Sarah's chair, I want to make something absolutely clear. The allegations made by Rebecca Winters are false. Documentation proving this will be distributed to all of you, including medical records and signed statements from 5 years ago. The truth may not matter, one board member spoke up. The Chicago Preservation Board is already expressing concerns. The Winters family has considerable influence in historical preservation circles. The design is solid, Sarah found herself saying. All eyes turned to her. The renovation plan doesn't just preserve the building's history, it celebrates it. Anyone who actually reviews the proposals will see that. Miss Carter, another board member, Johnson, she thought his name was, leaned forward. Your work is not in question, but perhaps given the current situation, Richard's voice cut through the tension. "We need to present a united front. Miss Carter's designs have already won preliminary approval. Changing direction now would only lend credence to the Winters family's accusations." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude toward her future father-in-law. He might not have welcomed her warmly at first, but he was firmly on their side now. "There's more," Amanda spoke from the doorway, tablet in hand. "Rebecca Winters just announced. She's holding a press conference at noon. Outside our building." Josh's hand tightened on Sarah's chair. "She's trying to force a confrontation. Then let's give her one." Everyone turned to stare at Sarah. "Not the kind she wants," she clarified. "But I'm tired of other people controlling our narrative. You said there's documentation proving she lied about the pregnancy. Release it, all of it." "Sarah," Josh started, but she cut him off. "No, listen. She's counting on us being too diplomatic, too corporate to fight back. She's using my pregnancy to add weight to her lies, so let's show everyone the difference between truth and manipulation." Richard's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Sarah outlined her plan quickly. By the time she finished, even the most conservative board members were nodding. "It's risky," Josh said softly. "Are you sure?" Sarah thought of their baby, of the life they were building, of the future they'd planned. Some things are worth fighting for. At exactly noon, Rebecca Winters stood before a crowd of reporters outside Blackwood Tower, her perfectly rehearsed speech ready. But before she could speak, the massive video screens that wrapped around the building's base flickered to life. There was Sarah, radiant in her burgundy suit, standing in what was clearly a doctor's office. Josh held her hand as a sonogram image appeared on the screen beside them. "Life is full of beautiful surprises." Sarah's voice rang out over the speakers. "Josh and I wanted to share one of ours with you." The camera pulled back to show Dr. Anderson, one of New York's most respected obstetricians. "I'm delighted to confirm that Ms. Carter is 15 weeks pregnant with her and Mr. Blackwood's first child. Both mother and baby are doing wonderfully." The scene changed to Josh in his office, his face serious. 5 years ago, false allegations were made about my personal life. Today, we're releasing all documentation proving those claims were fabricated. But more importantly, we're choosing to focus on the future, on our child, on our upcoming marriage, and on creating something lasting and true. Finally, the screen showed Sarah in their new apartment, surrounded by moving boxes and baby books. "Love isn't about manipulation or corporate mergers," she said, one hand resting on her visible bump. "It's about building something real together. Josh and I invite you to share in our joy, even as we ask for privacy during this special time." The screens went dark. In the stunned silence that followed, Rebecca Winters stood frozen, her prepared speech useless in the face of such a direct counter-narrative. Up in the boardroom, Sarah watched through the windows as reporters turned their cameras away from Rebecca, rushing instead to capture the moment Josh walked out of the building to join her, taking her hand in full view of the crowd. "Well played," Richard said quietly beside her. "Elizabeth would have been proud." Sarah touched her locket, feeling stronger than she ever had. "It's not over, is it?" "No," Richard admitted. "The Winters family won't give up easily, but they've underestimated you, just like I did at first." Below, Josh pulled her into a kiss that sent the photographers into a frenzy. Sarah smiled against his lips, knowing that tomorrow's headlines would tell a very different story than today's had. But in the back of her mind, a small voice wondered what other shadows from Josh's past might be lurking, waiting to test their newfound strength. The Chicago Historical Society's boardroom felt colder than it should have for an October afternoon. Sarah sat straight-backed in her chair, perfectly composed in a sage-green maternity dress that complemented her 6-month baby bump while maintaining professional elegance. Before her, spread across the mahogany table, lay her complete renovation. Plans for the Winters Blackwood Hotel. Yes, the Winters Blackwood. The name change had been Richard's idea, a calculated compromise to appease the Preservation Board and acknowledge the building's complex history. Sarah had redesigned the logo herself, finding a way to honor both families' legacies while creating something uniquely modern. As you can see, she continued her presentation, conscious of the hostile stares from James Winters and his allies on the board. We're not just preserving the original Art Deco elements, we're making them the centerpiece of the design. Each floor tells part of the hotel's story, from its founding in 1925 through its golden age in the 1940s, and now into its future. She clicked to the next slide, revealing her designs for the grand lobby. Gasps of appreciation echoed through the room, even from some of Winters' supporters. Sarah had spent weeks perfecting this concept, working through nights when the baby's kicks kept her awake. The original ceiling medallions will be restored and enhanced with modern lighting techniques, she explained, warming to her subject. We're using a pioneering method that... Excuse me, James Winters interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. While these drawings are charming, I have to question whether someone in your condition is prepared to handle a project of this magnitude. The room fell silent. Sarah felt Josh tense beside her, saw Richard's hand close into a fist on the table, but before either Blackwood man could speak, Sarah found herself smiling. My condition, Mr. Winters? She rested one hand on her bump. You mean my pregnancy? The state of creating new life while simultaneously creating new designs? I assure you I'm more than capable of both. She clicked to the next slide, a detailed timeline of the renovation process. In fact, I've already completed the first 3 phases of planning, scheduled around my January due date. The team is fully prepared to execute while I'm on maternity leave, and I'll be returning to oversee the final stages in March. But surely, did you have similar concerns when your own daughter claimed to be pregnant 5 years ago? The words left her mouth before she could stop them. A collective intake of breath swept the room. James Winters' face purpled. How dare you? I dare, Mr. Winters, because unlike that situation, my commitment to both this project and my child is genuine. Sarah's voice remained calm, professional. Now, shall we discuss the restoration methods for the ballroom's original chandeliers, or would you like to continue questioning my capabilities based on my personal life? From the corner of her eye, she saw Josh hiding a smile behind his hand. Richard didn't bother hiding his. The rest of the presentation proceeded without interruption. When the board voted to approve her designs, including several of Winters' reluctant allies, Sarah felt a triumph sweeter than anything she'd known in her professional life. Later that evening, in their apartment overlooking Central Park, Sarah kicked off her heels with a groan of relief. I think your daughter is celebrating our victory by practicing her kickboxing. Josh knelt before her chair, placing his hands on her belly. Sure enough, a series of strong kicks met his touch. She's fierce, like her mother. Sarah ran her fingers through his hair. I still say it's a boy. Want to bet? His eyes sparkled with mischief. Winner chooses the nursery colors. Deal! Sarah laughed, then winced as their baby landed a particularly solid kick. Though at this rate, we might need to design a boxing gym instead of a nursery. Josh's expression softened as he looked up at her. You were amazing today. The way you handled Winters. I learned from the best. Sarah touched the locket she still wore, their first sonogram picture now joined by today's latest scan. Your father's been coaching me on boardroom politics. Has he? Josh's eyebrows rose. Should I be worried about you two conspiring together? Definitely, Sarah grinned. He's already planning our baby's future in the company. Yesterday, he started explaining the importance of proper prep schools. Josh laughed, but there was a hint of something else in his eyes. Wonder, maybe, or gratitude. Sometimes I can't believe how much has changed. A year ago, he was trying to buy you off. Now he's planning our child's education. Life's funny that way. Sarah shifted in her chair, trying to find a comfortable position. Though I could do with a little less excitement for a while. These board meetings are exhausting. Josh stood, pulling her gently to her feet. Then let's take a break. Run away with me this weekend. What? The Hamptons' house is empty. We could leave tomorrow, spend a few days by the ocean before the weather turns too cold. His hands settled on her waist. Just us, no board meetings, no Winter's family, no press. We could work on the nursery plans, pick names, plan our wedding, Sarah added softly. They'd been engaged for 2 months now, but between the Chicago project and the pregnancy, they hadn't set a date. If you want. Josh's thumbs traced circles on her hips. Or we could elope, right now. Sarah laughed. Your father would never forgive us. He's already hired 3 different wedding planners to compete for the honor. Let them compete. I just want you. You and our baby and our life together. The simple sincerity in his voice made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. Damn pregnancy hormones. Josh. She started to speak, but a sharp pain in her abdomen made her gasp instead. Sarah? His face filled with concern. What's wrong? Nothing. I'm sure it's just another pain hit, stronger this time. Oh, I'm calling Dr. Anderson. Josh was already pulling out his phone, his other arm supporting her as she swayed. It's too early, Sarah whispered, fear replacing triumph. Josh, it's too early. Everything's going to be fine, but his voice shook slightly as he helped her to the sofa. The car's on its way. Just breathe, love. Just breathe. As Sarah clutched his hand through another wave of pain, she couldn't help thinking that this was exactly what she'd been afraid of. The moment when their perfect plans spun out of control. In the distance, she heard Josh barking orders into his phone, felt him pressing a kiss to her forehead, whispered promises that everything would be all right. But as the elevator doors opened and medical personnel rushed in, Sarah knew that some battles couldn't be won with clever presentations or well-chosen words. This fight would be different, and it would test their love in ways that no business rival or society scandal ever could. The private waiting room at New York Presbyterian felt like limbo. Josh paced the length of it for what must have been the 1,000th time, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled, his tie long since discarded. Every time the door opened, he spun toward it, hoping for news. Sit down, son, Richard said quietly from his chair by the window. You're not helping anyone by wearing yourself out. Josh ran a hand through his disheveled hair. She's been in there for hours. And Dr. Anderson is the best in the city. Richard's calm voice anchored him. Sarah is strong. The baby is strong. But it's too early. Josh sank into the chair beside his father, his voice breaking. What if... Don't. Richard's hand gripped his shoulder. Don't torture yourself with what-ifs. The door opened again, this time admitting Lily, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She'd arrived within minutes of Sarah being admitted, still wearing her waitress uniform from the shift she'd left mid-service. Any news? She asked, handing Josh one of the coffees. He shook his head, but before he could speak, Dr. Anderson appeared in the doorway. Her surgical cap was still on, and Josh's heart stopped at the sight of it. Mr. Blackwood? Josh stood so quickly, he nearly spilled the coffee. How are they? The good news is we've stopped the contractions. Dr. Anderson's voice was steady, professional. Sarah is stable, and the baby's heartbeat is strong, but... Josh felt his father stand beside him, a solid presence at his back. She'll need to be on complete bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy. No work, no stress, minimal movement. We need to keep that baby cooking for at least another 8 weeks. Relief made Josh's knees weak. Can I see her? She's asking. For you. Dr. Anderson's professional mask softened slightly. She's scared, Mr. Blackwood. She needs you to be strong for her right now. Josh nodded, already moving toward the door, but his father's voice stopped him. Tell her, Richard said quietly. Tell her that Elizabeth had the same thing with you, complete bed rest from 6 months, and you turned out just fine. Josh turned, surprised. His father had rarely spoken about his mother's pregnancy. She was terrified, Richard continued, something vulnerable in his eyes. But she was also the strongest person I've ever known, until Sarah. The comparison meant more than Josh could express. He nodded once, then followed Dr. Anderson to Sarah's room. She looked small in the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily. Around her, her hands rested protectively over her belly, and her eyes were red from crying. But when she saw Josh, she managed a weak smile. I'm sorry, she whispered as he rushed to her side. The presentation, the stress. Shh. Josh gathered her hands in his. None of that matters. Only you matter. You and our little kickboxer. As if on cue, the baby moved under their joined hands. Sarah's smile grew more real. Dr. Anderson says she's fine, she said softly. Strong. Heartbeat. She? Josh raised an eyebrow. I thought you were sure it was a boy. I got a peek during the ultrasound. Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. I was so scared we were losing her. Hey. Josh perched carefully on the edge of the bed, drawing her into his arms. We're not losing anyone. You're both going to be fine. And you know what? What? My mother went through the exact same thing when she was pregnant with me. Dad just told me. Sarah pulled back slightly, surprise in her eyes. Really? Really? And if you're half as strong as she was, which I know you are, everything's going to be perfect. A knock at the door interrupted them. Richard stood there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. May I come in? Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. Richard approached the bed, his usual commanding presence softened by genuine concern. The doctor tells me you'll be our guest for a few days. I'm sorry about the Chicago presentation. Schedule. If you finish that sentence, Richard cut her off gently, I'll be forced to remind you that you've already won that battle. The project will wait. Your health and my granddaughter's health will not. Sarah's eyes widened at his use of granddaughter. Richard's lips curved in a slight smile. Josh isn't the only one who can keep a secret. He reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a small, weathered velvet box. I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this. Perhaps now is that time. He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver bracelet, its links interwoven with tiny sapphires. Elizabeth wore this during her bed rest with Josh, he explained, his voice rough with emotion. She said it reminded her that some things are worth waiting for. He carefully fastened it around Sarah's wrist. Welcome to the family, my dear. Officially. Sarah's tears spilled over as she stared at the bracelet. Thank you, she whispered. Another knock heralded Lily's arrival with Regina and several members of the design team, all carrying flowers and stuffed animals. The whole office sends their love, Regina announced. And don't worry about the project. We've got it covered until you're back. As Sarah's room filled with flowers and soft conversations, Josh watched his fiancée, holding court from her hospital bed, their baby safe beneath her hands, his mother's bracelet glinting on her wrist. She caught his eye across the room and smiled, that special smile that was just for him. In that moment, Josh knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Board meetings could wait. Business rivals could plot. The only thing that mattered was right here in this room. Later that night, when everyone else had gone and Sarah slept peacefully beside him in her hospital bed, Josh made a silent promise. To their daughter, he would build a world worthy of her, not of power plays and corporate battles, but of love and family and things that truly mattered. As if agreeing, the baby kicked against his palm. Josh smiled, remembering what his father had said about Sarah being as strong as his mother. Maybe strength, like love, was something that passed down through generations. Little did he know that strength would be tested one final time before their story reached its end. The Chicago hotel's grand ballroom sparkled under restored art. Deco chandeliers, their light catching the gold and silver details Sarah had painstakingly chosen. At 8 months pregnant, she stood in the center of the space, one hand resting on her pronounced bump, while the other held her tablet, directing the final installation preparations. The settees for the east alcove should arrive within the hour, she told her team, trying to ignore the way her ankles ached. After 6 weeks of strict bed rest, Dr. Anderson had finally cleared her for limited work, just in time for the hotel's preview gala. "Miss Carter?" A young intern approached nervously. "Mr. Blackwood is asking for you in the lobby. He says it's urgent." Sarah frowned. Josh was supposed to be in New York until tomorrow, handling final preparations for their wedding next month. They'd decided to marry before the baby came, in an intimate ceremony that would combine their love of design with their growing family. She found Josh in the magnificently restored lobby, but one look at his face told her something was wrong. "What is it?" "James Winters is dead." Sarah's hand flew to her throat where her locket still hung. "What? How?" "Car accident, early this morning." Josh ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of distress. "But that's not all. His will. Sarah, he left controlling interest in Winters Hotels to Rebecca." The implications hit her. Immediately, Rebecca Winters now had the power to block their operating permits, to challenge their renovation licenses, to potentially stop the project mere days before its grand reopening. "She can't," Sarah whispered. "Not now. Not after everything. She's already filed the injunction." Josh's voice was tight with anger. "Her lawyers delivered it an hour ago. She's claiming the renovation violates historical preservation codes." Sarah's knees felt weak. Josh guided her to one of the newly installed lobby sofas, the ones she'd specially designed to complement the original architecture while providing modern comfort. "This is everything she wanted," Sarah said, looking around at the space she'd poured her heart into. "The hotel, revenge against you." "Sarah," Regina's voice interrupted them. "Rebecca Winters is here. She's asking to speak with you." "Absolutely not," Josh started, but Sarah caught his arm. "No, let her come." Steel entered her voice. "I'm done letting her control this narrative." Josh searched her face. "Are you sure?" "Dr. Anderson said no stress." "I'm sure." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Trust me." Rebecca Winters swept into the lobby like she owned it, which Sarah supposed she technically now did. She'd lost weight since their last encounter, her expensive suit hanging slightly loose on her frame. But her eyes were sharp as ever as they took in the restored space. "Impressive," she said, running a hand along a marble column. "You've managed to capture the original spirit while adding your own touch." "Thank you," Sarah replied calmly. "Though I suspect you're not here to discuss design choices." "No." Rebecca's smile was cold. "I'm here to offer you a deal." "We're not interested," Josh snapped, but Rebecca's eyes stayed on Sarah. "The deal isn't for you, Josh. It's for her." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "Walk away. Both of her." "You!" Sign over operational control of the hotel to Winters Enterprises, and I'll withdraw the injunction. You can have your perfect little family, your design career, just not here. Not with my father's legacy. Sarah felt the baby kick hard, as if protesting Rebecca's words. She pressed a hand to the spot, drawing strength from her daughter's movement. You know what I've realized, Rebecca. Sarah's voice was quiet but clear. You've spent 5 years trying to destroy what Josh took from you. But he didn't take anything. You lost it yourself, just like you're about to lose this. Rebecca's smile faltered. I own controlling interest. In Winters Hotels, yes, but this isn't just a Winters Hotel anymore. Sarah struggled to her feet, Josh's hand steadying her. Look around, really look. Every detail in this renovation honors both families' legacies. The merged logo on the fountain, the historical photos in the gallery showing both families' contributions, the blended design elements that tell a story of collaboration, not competition. She gestured to the soaring ceiling, where original Winters Hotel medallions intertwined with Blackwood Enterprises' modern lighting design. Your father saw that, Sarah continued. Why do you think he approved my designs? He understood that sometimes the best way to preserve a legacy is to let it grow into something new. You don't know anything about my father, Rebecca spat, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. I know he kept every sketch I sent him, Sarah said softly. Regina found them in his office this morning. He'd marked them up with notes, suggestions. He was helping us, Rebecca. In his own way, he was trying to heal this rift. Rebecca turned away sharply, but not before Sarah caught the shine of tears in her eyes. The injunction stays, she said, but her voice wavered. Then file it. Sarah moved closer, one hand still cradling her bump. But first, come to the gallery. There's something you need to see. Despite her obvious reluctance, Rebecca followed Sarah to the hotel's newly installed history gallery. There, taking pride of place, was a photograph Sarah had discovered in the building's archives. A young James Winters and Richard Blackwood standing together at the hotel's original opening, both smiling with genuine friendship. They were friends once, Sarah said quietly, before business and ambition got in the way. Your father kept this photo all these years, and now his grandchild will be born into a world where that friendship has been renewed, where old wounds have healed. Rebecca stared at the photo for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. The baby, is it a girl? Yes. Dad always wanted a granddaughter. Rebecca touched the glass over her father's smiling face. Then, so quietly, Sarah almost missed it. The injunction will be withdrawn within the hour. She turned and walked away without another word, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Josh moved to follow her, but Sarah caught his arm. Let her go, she said softly. Sometimes the best victory is letting someone keep their dignity. Josh gathered her close, his hand joining hers over their active daughter. When did you get so wise? Around the time I learned that real strength isn't about winning battles, Sarah smiled up at him. It's about knowing which ones matter. The grand reopening gala a week later was a triumph. Sarah wore a custom-made gown that celebrated her pregnancy rather than trying to hide it, Elizabeth's bracelet glinting at her wrist, her locket holding not just sonogram pictures now, but also that historic photo of James and Richard. As she stood beside Josh, watching Richard raise a toast to the future of the merged hotels, she felt their daughter kick enthusiastically. I think she approves, she whispered to Josh. Of course she does. He kissed her temple. She's a Blackwood woman, speaking of which. He nodded toward the entrance, where Rebecca Winters stood hesitantly. Sarah smiled and waved her over. After a moment's pause, Rebecca joined them, carrying a small gift box. For the baby, she said simply, handing it to Sarah. Inside was a delicate silver rattle engraved with both the Winters and Blackwood crests. It was mine and my grandmother's before that. Dad would have wanted her to have it. Sarah felt tears threaten those ever-present pregnancy hormones, but managed to smile. Thank you, truly. As Rebecca moved away to speak with some preservation, board members, Josh squeezed Sarah's hand. You've managed to do what 2 generations of Blackwood men couldn't, he murmured. You've brought peace to an empire. Sarah laughed softly. I just designed some rooms and followed my heart. You did more than that. Richard joined them, his eyes warm as they rested on Sarah's bump. You reminded us what Elizabeth always knew, that true legacy isn't about buildings or business. It's about family, about healing old wounds, about building something that lasts. Later that night, as Sarah stood in the nursery of their apartment, now fully decorated in soft greens and golds, she looked out over the city lights of Manhattan. So much had changed since that stormy night when she'd met Josh at the Velvet Room. She'd been a waitress with dreams then, scared but determined. Now, cradled in Josh's arms as their daughter kicked between them, she was still determined. But she wasn't scared anymore. Whatever challenges came next, parenthood, marriage, running an empire, they would face them together, strengthened by the love they'd fought so hard to protect. What are you thinking about? Josh asked, his hands splayed protectively. Over her belly. About storms, she said softly, and how sometimes they wash away the old to make room for something better. He smiled against her hair. Speaking of something better, I had an idea about the Chicago penthouse suite. Sarah turned in his arms, already reaching for her ever-present sketch pad. As they bent their heads together over new designs, their daughter kicked approvingly. Between them, adding her own rhythm to the symphony of their shared dreams. Some love stories are written in grand gestures and dramatic moments, but the best ones, Sarah had learned, are written in the quiet spaces between the storms, in shared dreams, in healing hands, in the courage to believe that something beautiful can grow from the most unexpected beginnings. And as the lights of Manhattan twinkled below them like earthbound stars, Sarah Carter, soon to be Sarah Blackwood, knew that their story was really just beginning. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.